All right. Well, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Thanks for joining us at the Healthcare Project Delivery Conference 2021. This is my third year speaking at the conference, and it's kind of bittersweet to not be. I'm sitting here in an office in Chicago rather than being in San Diego, so wish I was there, but with all of you. But hopefully we can share a little bit of knowledge today about integrated project delivery for small projects. We heard it during the initial keynote and presentation about the idea of integrated project delivery, IPD for small projects, IPD light, things like that. And we've seen a real movement, especially in the last year with COVID, that we need a better way to integrate our teams and work together as a team. So hopefully this will be helpful today. I will let everyone in on a little bit of secret right now before we even start, which is integrated project delivery for small projects or large projects. There isn't a huge amount of difference, but what I will show you today is the things that we really try to focus on when it comes to small projects. So let me, all right, let me go through here. This is myself. I'm John Zahara. I'm with a company called Integrated Facilities Solutions. We're out of Chicago area. Here's my contact information in case you need to get a hold of me. I've been doing speaking at events like this for a number of years, and we'll keep moving. A little bit of information about my company. We are an owner's representative or program manager, so we are the orchestra conductor, as I like to call it, for the construction process. We're a 21-person firm, and we've successfully completed over 3,000 projects, $3.5 billion in work in the last 20 plus years. Really a great story for a very small company in Illinois. And hopefully what I'll guide you through today is our role as an owner's representative and why the owner is so important, especially during integrated project delivery. So we're talking about two things, the idea of integrated project delivery for small projects, and then I'm going to roll in the concept that we had recently, which really centered around the idea of retail health clinics and how important those have become, especially during this time period where we have COVID and our hospitals are maybe not as busy as we need them or want them to be. So let's start with the idea of the agreement, the contract that we're going to put in place when it comes to an integrated project delivery contract or project. And that's either a tri-party agreement where you have the owner, architect, and general contractor as part of the core team signing one contract, or we have a core team that's much larger in a poly-party agreement. We have the owner, architect. In our case, we like to have electrical and mechanical engineers signatory to that contract, along with the general contractor. We like those engineers at the table because they offer a lot of really good, sound advice. And they're smart people, so I like having them at the table. I like the interaction I can have as an owner's representative with those engineers, because I think that's really valuable pieces of information that we need to have at the table at all times. So we've traditionally gone, when we've participated in integrated project delivery and IFOAs, with the poly-party approach rather than the tri-party agreement. Under that poly-party agreement, we have a set of what we would call trade partners. These are contractors that put their profit at risk along with the general contractor. So we kind of call it taxation without representation, because that group of contractors, for example, our steel or carpentry or drywall contractor, the MEP contractors for sure, are putting their profit at risk. They're being represented, though, by the general contractor table. So anytime we have a large contractual decision that we have to make, we make it as a team, as a unit, all with a vote. And the votes have to be unanimous or else we don't move forward. So if there's any dissenter of the 5 signatories, we don't move forward with that decision. And I get a lot of questions about, what happens, how does the owner keep control of a project when we have a circumstance like this? And I think the main focus we really want to talk about is we develop the integrated project team, and we build this culture as we come together with this contract. And so we don't see a lot of adversarial disagreements happening when we have an IPD contract because of the culture that we build and instill from the beginning. And that takes a strong owner to be at the table with this team. And the owner actually has more control under this contract than they do in a traditional AIA or consensus docs contract, for that matter. In those contracts, we're setting ourselves up to be adversaries. Owner signing a contractor with a general contractor, owner signing a contract with an architect. And we're kind of pitted against each other in those scenarios rather than working together as a team. Some of the things that we do, especially in a small project, is we're looking at bringing trade partners on in a very quick manner. And I've laid out two kind of examples of things that we've done here. The first being this idea of kind of bringing in a team and doing qualifications, having them propose a budget, looking at their overhead and profit, and doing an interview process. A lot of folks, again, ask the question, how do I keep the idea of competitive spirit alive during an IFOA? If I just go right to the second example I have here, which is no proposal, no interview, we just pick our team and go. Well, we do that by creating a qualifications and a proposed budget and including overhead and profit. We want to know where their dollars are going to be spent on these projects. It's an open book process. So you can see in the one example, in a two-week time period, we had a submission and selection process for all of our key trade partners. And I see that there's a question about where's the structural engineer in the IFOA. So let me go back a slide. So the structural engineer most often is working directly for the architect. And so they're not necessarily part of the core team where they're signing the contract. But I would consider them to be an IPD consultant, meaning they're putting their profit at risk and they're sitting at our tables when we need them to sit at our tables. And I have some examples later of how they participate in the event, in the contract, and participate in these meetings that we have. But they're contractually attached to the architect, but they put their profit at risk, similar to how the trade partners are doing it. They are an IPD consultant connected to the architect with a contractual obligation back to the team, again, putting their profit at risk. So when we think about our project delivery methods, we have these traditional stage gates of a strategic need, conceptual development, schematic development, design development. These are the traditional names that we've provided to our different stage gates for our project development. What we're doing now is we're breaking down those stage gates and molding them into a more continuous process without these definite hard lines between them. So in the case of a project delivery method, the team is onboarded during this conceptual development, during this validation period. This is when we're doing our validation study. So the owner comes to us with a strategic need and says, we want to build a project. We then work with our team to do this conceptual development and onboard that team during the process I just explained. We then move to schematic development, but during that time period, we're also looking very closely at costs. And that's when we lock in what we call our EMP, the estimated maximum price. So this is the top dollar value that we are setting forth as our project budget. This is not something that's negotiable once we get past this line. That's the number that's in the contract that everyone agrees to. Well, along the way then, we have to be doing cost checks, because what I don't like is I don't like to use the words of value engineering. I know they're important and they've been important in our business for a long time, but I really like the idea of designing with cost in mind rather than going back and doing a cost analysis at certain lines. So in a traditional method, we might have a line here at schematic design where we then check costs. We're not checking it along the way. But you see, even during construction, we're looking at costs. Every month, we're doing cost projections to see where are we at, where are we spending our dollars, who's short, who's got extra money they could drop to the bottom line. We're in this together as a team. That's the concept. Large project, small project, doesn't matter. This is extremely important. We have to do this cost checking. Dashboards are, again, extremely important in the process. One sheet of paper. This is an 11 by 17 piece of paper. It's got a lot of good information on there. It's very hard to see on this slide, and I'll zoom in a minute. But really, the data on this sheet that I'm explaining to you is not important. What I'm trying to showcase is that you need a dashboard. You need something that captures the information. So I can hand this to a person that isn't sitting in every meeting every day, and they'll know what's going on. They can take a pulse of what's going on with the project. So if I zoom in a little bit, we can see where we at with our key performance indicators on the project. These are the leading indicators. Where are we at with those indicators? Where are we at with our cost trends? How are we doing on risk reward profit projections? Our PPC, our planned percent complete. Are we doing what we said we were going to do? When we bring in early trade partners, we now can engage them in prefabrication. This is, again, something that we've really focused on, especially in the last year. If we can't all be on site together, how do we build in a smarter, better way in order to make sure that we are capturing the most efficient process? When we bring in early trade partners, you can see the diagram at the top left here. We're designing not for intent, but for fabrication. So we're designing this head wall system to then be fabricated in a shop to be brought up to our site. Same thing with this is a boiler setup in a mechanical room. We're bringing this entire frame out and setting it in place rather than doing these individual components at a time. There's a question from Henry about the reasonable contingency for the EMP. So I'll go back to this for a minute here. When we're setting our EMP here, what we are doing to set a contingency is really looking at what are the risks for this project. And instead of just saying it's 10% or 5% of the overall cost of the project, we're applying dollars to each one of those risks and creating a log of everything that might be risky on a project and applying dollars to each one of those risks. And if we do that, we are now building our contingency with a much better mindset than just putting a 10% number on it. So you have to collaborate with this entire onboarded team in order to build that contingency. Now I have something that really makes sense rather than just a target I'm throwing at a wall. We'll skip forward here to kind of just some of the tools we use. You know, we are going to always use Last Planner. The contract drives us to use Last Planner. We need to use it. We use it for, the main reason really we use it for is schedule certainty. I can't have a project that I'm saying will be done on a certain time unless I have the ability to drill down with my entire trade partner team and do the hard work it takes to say, how am I going to coordinate this very difficult project into bite-sized chunks? And I do that using the Last Planner system. Now we're using technology as a tool for the Last Planner system when we all can't stand in the room together. We see a lot of our project sites, especially at hospitals where everyone's wearing masks, and we are as socially distant or physically distant as we possibly can. And we can do Last Planner pull planning in a room, in a big room, with our collaborative team. And the men and women that are working on our site are wearing the proper PPE, so we can still do this in person and meet in person. We need to be transparent. This is just a poster of one of the things we had on one of our project sites about the idea of what are our project goals and key performance indicators. This is language that comes right out of our contracts. We want 85 planned percent complete. We want to have RFIs that are submitted with proposed solutions so we don't waste time. We want 0 lost time exits. I mean, that is a huge one. And I have another question about getting sufficient interest from fabricators when we're talking about smaller projects when we're doing prefabrication. So, you know, we've done prefabrication for a long time. We've prefabricated millwork, and I would call furniture systems as a somewhat prefabricated system. And I think the really important thing is, yes, there is an economy of scale to prefabricating. We're not going to prefabricate entire bathrooms if we have a project that has 5 bathrooms. We're not going to do that. There's not an efficiency model there. But I think a lot of contractors understand that during our 3D modeling process, which we have to use when we build projects like this. We have to take that, and we are going to find the best ways to prefabricate, even if it's the smallest components, like adding in the VAV controllers into the VAV boxes before they come on site. These are things we've been doing for a long time. That I challenge the team to say that is prefabrication. It doesn't have to be entire module systems. It can be smaller prefabrication. But what we're trying to do is eliminate waste from this in the process, and we're trying to just drive efficiency, because we know that if we can be efficient with that, we're going to save time, and we're going to achieve this idea of lost time accidents and zero lost time accidents. Another question on quality. Quality control has been lacking in the prefab units. That is a comment that someone made on the chat here. The idea of quality control is something that we have to be very conscious of. You can see why I want my engineers signing this contract agreement, because then I can have the engineering team checking in on that quality while it's being built in a factory somewhere or in the mechanical contractor's shop. I want that engineering team, that architecture team, if they're not coming to the job site to check quality control, we're checking it when we go to the plants. And you have to plan for that. You have to understand that, and you have to understand that contractually we want that quality check. One interesting comment about quality is when I went back, if we go back earlier in the slide presentation, we talked about this idea of the business case. And I now, we for a long time, there have always been three legs to that business case stool: scope, schedule, budget. We always talked about scope, schedule, budget. The fourth leg of that stool, according, with that comment in mind, is quality. We have to have quality built in inherently into our projects, or we're not going to be able to deliver on the promises that we are making. Again, transparency is important. What are the conditions of satisfaction? Let's put this stuff on the wall. And I direct you to that fourth bullet point on here about the idea of profit. We write this into our contracts when it's an IFOA, IPD contract. We want every team member to leave the project with a profit. Now, you don't hear a lot of owners talk about that, or owners' representatives talk about profit and wanting their team to be profitable. We have always felt that if the team is not profitable, the owner will get a bad project outcome. Now, I'm not saying exorbitant profit, I'm not saying being motivated by profit. Profit is the outcome of good, solid work. And that's what we need to focus on. And you can see that if we do this process correctly, even on small projects, these are projects that are under $10 million. We're completing them 2 to 5 months ahead of schedule. Why is that? Well, because we're collaborating at a very high level very early on in the project. The more people we get talking about something earlier, the better we are. It's like this idea that we can lower the water to see the rocks, that whole concept of really finding out what is coming at us. It's the whole concept of why we build a contingency with risk in mind, risk mitigation in mind, rather than just putting a percentage on there. Percentage is an old school way of building a contingency. The challenge really now is to understand what our risks are and put those forth with a dollar amount, and then try to study the project well enough and design the project well enough that we can get rid of and mitigate those risks. So just some questions for us as we challenge ourselves about how do we do this? Is the IFOA scalable? How small can we go? I really think that we could go to probably $1 million, $1.5 million in our construction portion of the contract with an IFOA. Below that, I think all the onboarding time, and there's a lot of risk, reward, profit sharing that is probably not going to be inherently valuable to the client or to the rest of the team. Onboarding our teams with the idea of building a culture is important. And then the last bullet point, what role does the owner play? I think I showed you that you need a powerful owner at the table. Later on this week, I'm doing a presentation with another owner friend of mine, and we are going to talk about the idea of the role of the owner and how important an owner is in this process. The second part of this presentation really centers around the idea of retail health. Now we're going to an even smaller project. These are under $1 million each in construction costs. How can I scale what I just talked about with an IPD contract to an even smaller retail health clinic? Well, we talked during the keynote in the early presentations, there was a conversation about the future of healthcare. How does this look? What kind of outpatient facilities do we need? This idea of the hub and spoke concept. Our client came to us and said, we want to build immediate care sites, 2,500 square feet or less inside of a strip mall to expand our footprint out, but also to provide this experience that people want to have when they're dealing with healthcare. They want to see this one-on-one kind of boutique type setting. So how do we do that? And how do we collaborate with my construction team on a very, very small project? And how do I start to see the same benefits I would if I signed an IFOA as if I don't? And in this case, what we were doing is not signing an IFOA, but rather doing things with a more traditional GMP contract, still using all of the integrated project tools that we can. And we can see through this presentation part that what we're building is this retail health clinic away from a traditional emergency department. We're getting away from this idea of a hard to navigate, uncomfortable place that isn't convenient for patients. And we're building something modern and clean and new looking, with all kinds of conveniences for the patient. With less waiting time, you set an appointment, you show up, you're there, and they're easier to navigate because they're right next to your Subway or your health clinic or your workout space. If you're going to an Athletico, we seem to build these next to Athleticos across the Chicago area. So, I talked about culture in the last section of this presentation, and really the focus on this centers around these teams. And these are all the teams that were involved with these very small projects. So we had a rollout of up to 50 of these projects. We ended up building 20 so far. One thing we found was that teamwork and respect seemed to be the overriding principles and core values of each one of these team members, the owner, the owner's representative, the contractor, and the architect. We all talk a lot about teamwork and respect, and we have to have that as we build our culture. We build our culture with a team. We build the culture within the team. So I don't necessarily have that core team IFOA that we talked about earlier, but what I do have is an integrated project delivery system that is using all of the lean tools and methods and mindset. I just don't have the contract. But how do I do that? I do that because I have partners that I've worked with for a long time, upwards of 2 decades with some of these individuals in the companies that they belong to. So we know what it's like to work as a team and have respect for each other. One of the tools and ideas that we use then is to use data to drive our decision-making process with a concept called evidence-based design. Again, this is something that we integrate into our integrated project delivery systems, where we're using more data and metrics rather than just a gut feeling, kind of like that idea of the contingency. We're not using our gut to design something. We're using actual data and metrics of things that have happened in the past. We're taking polls and we're answering those questions. We see that millennials, which is what this is really geared towards, want a spa-like environment, the one at the bottom there. They want a spa-like environment. So how do I give them a spa-like environment? I have to be able to design it that way. We also have to look at how do we reduce waste through efficiency in a set program when we talk about the idea of these very small clinics. Again, I don't have an IPD contract that says this team is going to do this, but what I am doing is integrating the team. Before we even get to the site, I'm already looking at pre-approved lighting packages, pre-approving vendors so that we can order materials in a much quicker manner. It doesn't mean I took out the idea of a competitive nature. We still look at competitive pricing. We're looking at it earlier in the process. We're looking at it during design rather than waiting till we get to construction to look at our pricing. Same concept as the IFOA piece, but these are now these projects that are they're now under $1 million. And so I have to think a little bit differently about contractually how am I going to do this. But I'm not going to think differently about reducing waste, looking at efficiencies, and looking at how can I pre-order or look at packages of things, because I know that I have 10 sites that I'm going to build. Can I buy all of the light fixtures I need for all 10 sites or 5 of those sites at a time, and look at some efficiency in the ordering process? Some of the things we find when we look at really small projects is the challenges are centered around landlords who are not familiar with healthcare and putting healthcare into a retail building. Some of these spaces that we've renovated had a mattress firm in it. Well, mattress firm has like 1 bathroom and maybe a sink. Our spaces have 10 to 12 plumbing fixtures. They're highly complex because they're healthcare. The rooftop units require a certain amount of air exchanges, especially during this COVID period of time. We heard, again, earlier during the keynote, we heard about the idea of air filtration and looking at circulating our systems more often with 100% outside air, things like that. We've done these at these small retail clinics as well. We've created these super sites, we call them, where people can come here, get COVID tested, get COVID vaccinated, things like that. And we can do that in these smaller settings rather than having folks come to our main hospitals. But we need to make sure that our air systems are appropriate for that. I think a couple things we want to take away from today's presentation really center around this concept of cost certainty. I mentioned schedule certainty earlier, and that's why we use last planner. Well, we also need cost certainty. You can see a common theme here with the idea of cost benchmarking and baselining, bringing trade partners and continuing them from one project to the next. So basically what I was doing in an IFOA world, what that taught us was that we could take all of these IPD concepts and bring them to an even smaller project level. Having cost benchmarking, checking costs as we go, rather than waiting till the very end and doing a design and then bidding the project and seeing that we're way over budget. We're not doing that here. One of the other things we do is we do these pre-construction checklists. We're bringing trade partners and engineers on site during that lease negotiation. Why is it so important to have engineers on site during the lease negotiation? We're already looking at all of our utilities. Do they have enough electrical capacity for our X-ray equipment? What are our plumbing systems going to look like? What are we doing for our storefront? I mean, that takes 14 weeks. These projects take 10. So how can I order materials ahead of time to have them here so that I can actually finish my project at a time? We use the concept of choosing by advantages, where we're picking products based on their advantages as compared to other products of similar type. Rather than doing a value engineering concept, we're looking at choosing by advantages at the front end so that I get the right product the first time. I talked a lot about all these lean tools. I'm not going to go through each one of them, but the concept is we're using all of our lean tools and methods that we would use in an IPD project, whether it's a $1 billion project, a $10 million project, or in this case, a very small project under $1 million. I don't have the incentive of a risk-reward pool, but what you do see is I have an incentive of a repetitive project with no rebidding, as long as the team is clear about their costs up front to me. If we start to see cost trends going the wrong direction, we may have to look at replacing some trade partners in the mix. So I think the overall concept of this idea is that we're coming together as a collaborative team. We're checking our budget against our actual costs, and we're seeing if we can save dollars. And what we found is that we were able to save $1.4 million after 10 projects. So we dropped $1.4 million to the bottom line. That basically means that we are getting one of these sites at no cost. We're innovating. We're going live on time. We're creating schedule and cost certainty by thinking smarter, by acting smarter, and by working with our contract teams from the beginning rather than waiting and getting them onboarded way late in the process. And then you can see kind of the beautiful end result here. This is a great place to go for healthcare. It doesn't feel like a healthcare space to me. This feels like a spa. And that was the whole intent and idea behind what we tried to achieve with even a smaller drive in project cost. I mean, there's our results. Common theme throughout this presentation was the idea of cost and schedule certainty. So if you take anything away from that, using lean IPD tools, big project, small project, doesn't matter. Schedule and cost certainty are what we're really driving after. And I'll leave you just with a few of these other questions about the idea of, does project size really matter? Does size matter? Funny. Again, what role does the owner play in this team? And I think we'll see a common theme of a lot of owners speaking for the rest of this week at this conference about the idea of what the role the owner plays. So that's the presentation. I know there was a lot I covered. I'm willing to stick around and chat in the thing here. You can feel free to reach out to me on my email. There's my cell phone number. I'm a resource. I can be a resource for a lot of people. I love talking about this. I talk about lean project delivery a lot in my normal everyday life as a project manager, project executive, as well as with the Lean Construction Institute. And I will be presenting a couple other times this week. One on the nuts and bolts of the integrated form of agreement contract, and then another, like I said, on Friday with James Peace from UCSF about the idea of the role the owner plays in project delivery. So thank you for your time today, and I'm here to chat or, like I said, feel free to reach out via email if you need to. Thank you.